Chapter I. Charles Reading was the only son of a clergyman, who was in possession of a valuable benefice in a Midland county. His father intended him for orders, and sent him at a proper age to a public school. He had long revolved in his mind the respective advantages and disadvantages of public and private education, and had decided in favor of the former. Seclusion, he said, is no security for virtue. There is no telling what is in a boy's heart. He may look as open and happy as usual, and be as kind and attentive, when there is a great deal wrong going on within. The heart is a secret with its maker. No one on earth can hope to get at it or to touch it. I have a cure of souls. What do I really know of my parishioners? Nothing. Their hearts are sealed books to me. And this dear boy, he comes close to me. He throws his arms round me. But his soul is as much out of my sight as if he were at the antipodes. I am not accusing him of reserve. Dear fellow, his very love and reverence for me keep him in a sort of charmed solitude. I cannot expect to get at the bottom of him, each in his hidden sphere of bliss or woe. Our hermit spirits dwell. It is our lot here below. No one on earth can know Charles's secret thoughts. Did I guard him here at home ever so well, yet, in due time, it would be found that a serpent had crept into the heart of his innocence. Boys do not fully know what is good and what is evil. They do wrong things at first almost innocently. Novelty hides vice from them. There is no one to warn them or give them rules. And they become slaves of sin. While they are learning what sin is, they go to the university, and suddenly plunge into excesses, the greater in proportion to their inexperience. And, besides all this, I am not equal to the task of forming so active and inquisitive a mind as his. He already asks questions which I know not how to answer. So he shall go to a public school. There he will get discipline at least. Even if he has more of trial, at least he will gain habits of self-command, manliness, and circumspection. He will learn to use his eyes, and will find materials to use them upon, and thus will be gradually trained for the liberty which, anyhow, he must have when he goes to college. This was the more necessary, because, with many high excellences, Charles was naturally timid and retiring, oversensitive, and, though lively and cheerful, yet not without a tinge of melancholy in his character, which sometimes degenerated into mawkishness. To Eton, then, he went, and there had the good fortune to fall into the hands of an excellent tutor, who, while he instructed him in the old Church of England principles of Mant and Doyle, gave his mind a religious impression, which secured him against the allurements of bad company, whether at the school itself, or afterwards at Oxford. To that celebrated seat of learning he was in due time transferred, being entered at St. Saviour's College, and he is in his 6th term from matriculation, and his 4th of residence, at the time our story opens, at Oxford. It is needless to say, he had found a great number of his schoolfellows, but, it so happened, had found very few friends among them. Some were too gay for him, and he had avoided them. Others, with whom he had been intimate at Eton, having high connections, had fairly cut him on coming into residence, or, being entered at other colleges, had lost sight of him. Almost everything depends at Oxford, in the matter of acquaintance, on proximity of rooms. You choose your friend, not so much by your tastes, as by your staircase. There is a story of a London tradesman who lost custom after beautifying his premises, because his entrance went up a step. And we all know how great is the difference between open and shut doors when we walk along a street of shops. In a university, a youth's hours are portioned out to him. A regular man gets up and goes to chapel, breakfasts, gets up his lectures, goes to lecture, walks, dines. There is little to induce him to mount any staircase but his own. And if he does so, 10 to 1 he finds the friend from home whom he is seeking. Not to say that freshmen, who naturally have common feelings and interests, as naturally are allotted a staircase in common. And thus it was that Charles Reading was brought across William Sheffield, who had come into residence the same term as himself. The minds of young people are pliable and elastic, and easily accommodate themselves to anyone they fall in with. They find grounds of attraction both where they agree with one another and where they differ. What is congenial to themselves creates sympathy. What is correlative or supplemental creates admiration and esteem. And what is thus begun is often continued in after life by the force of habit and the claims of memory. Thus, in the choice of friends, chance often does for us as much as the most careful selection could have effected. What was the character and degree of that friendship which sprang up between the freshman Reading and Sheffield? We need not here minutely explain. It will be enough to say that what they had in common was freshmanship, good talents, and the back staircase, and that they differed in this, that Sheffield had lived a good deal with people older than himself, had read much in a desultory way, and easily picked up opinions and facts, especially on controversies of the day, without laying anything very much to heart, that he was ready, clear-sighted, unembarrassed, and somewhat forward. Charles, on the other hand, had little knowledge as yet of principles or their bearings, but understood more deeply than Sheffield, and held more practically what he had once received. He was gentle and affectionate, and easily led by others, except when duty clearly interfered. It should be added that he had fallen in with various religious denominations in his father's parish, and had a general, though not a systematic, knowledge of their tenets. What they were besides will be seen as our narrative advances. Chapter 2. It was a little past 1 p.m. when Sheffield, passing Charles's door, saw it open. The college servant had just entered with the usual half-commons for luncheon, and was employed in making up the fire. Sheffield followed him in, and found Charles in his cap and gown, lounging on the arm of his easy chair, and eating his bread and cheese. Sheffield asked him if he slept, as well as ate and drank, accoutred as he was. "I am just going for a turn into the meadow," said Charles. "This is to me the best time of the year. Nunc formosissimus annus _. Everything is beautiful. The laburnums are out, and the May. There is a greater variety of trees there than in any other place I know hereabouts. And the plains are so touching just now, with their small multitudinous green hands half opened. And there are 2 or 3 such fine dark willows stretching over the charwool. I think some dryad inhabits them. And as you wind along, just over your right shoulder is the long walk, with the Oxford buildings seen between the elms. They say there are dawns here who recollect when the foliage was unbroken. Nay, when you might walk under it in hard rain, and get no wet. I know I got drenched there the other day. Sheffield laughed, and said that Charles must put on his beaver, and walk with him a different way. He wanted a good walk. His head was stupid from his lectures. That old Jennings prosed so awfully upon Paley. It made him quite ill. He had talked of the apostles as neither deceivers nor deceived, of their sensible miracles, and of their dying for their testimony, till he did not know whether he himself was an underscore ens physiologicum underscore or a underscore totem metaphysicum underscore, when Jennings had cruelly asked him to repeat Paley's argument, and because he had not given it in Jennings' words, friend Jennings had pursed up his lips, and gone through the whole again, so intent in his wooden enthusiasm on his own analysis of it, that he did not hear the clock strike the hour, and, in spite of the men's shuffling their feet, blowing their noses, and looking at their watches, on he had gone for a good 20 minutes, past the time, and would have been going on even then, he verily believed, but for an interposition only equalled by that of the geese at the Capitol, for that, when he had got about half through his recapitulation, and was stopping at the end of a sentence to see the impression he was making, that uncouth fellow, lively, moved by what happy inspiration he did not know, suddenly broke in, apropos of nothing, nodding his head, and speaking in a clear cackle, with, "Pray, sir, what is your opinion of the infallibility of the Pope?" Upon which every one but Jennings did laugh out. But he, underscore au contraire underscore, began to look very black, and no one can tell what would have happened had he not cast his eyes by accident on his watch, on which he colored, closed his book, and underscore instanter underscore sent the whole lecture out of the room. Charles laughed in his turn, but added, "Yet, I assure you, Sheffield, that Jennings, stiff and cold as he seems, is, I do believe, a very good fellow at bottom. He has before now spoken to me with a good deal of feeling, and has gone out of his way to do me favors. I see poor bodies coming to him for charity continually, and they say that his sermons at Holy Cross are excellent." Sheffield said he liked people to be natural, and hated that dunnish manner. What good could it do? And what did it mean? "That is what I call bigotry," answered Charles. "I am for taking every one for what he is, and not for what he is not. One has this excellence, another that. No one is everything. Why should we not drop what we don't like, and admire what we like? This is the only way of getting through life, the only true wisdom, and surely our duty into the bargain." Sheffield thought this regular prose and unreal. "We must," he said, "have a standard of things. else one good thing is as good as another. But I can't stand here all day, he continued, when we ought to be walking. And he took off Charles's cap, and, placing his hat on him, instead, said, "Come, let us be going." "Then must I give up my meadow?" said Charles. "Of course you must," answered Sheffield. "You must take a beaver walk. I want you to go as far as Oxley, a village some little way out. All the vicars of which, sooner or later, are made bishops. Perhaps even walking there may do us some good." The friends set out, from hat to boot in the most approved Oxford bandbox cut of trimness and prettiness. Sheffield was turning into the High Street, when Reading stopped him. "It always annoys me," he said, "to go down High Street in a beaver. One is sure to meet a proctor." "All those university dresses are great fudge," answered Sheffield. "How are we the better for them? They are mere outside, and nothing else. Besides, our gown is so hideously ugly." "Well, I don't go along with your sweeping condemnation," answered Charles. "This is a great place, and should have a dress. I declare, when I first saw the procession of heads at St. Mary's, it was quite moving." "First, of course, the pokers," interrupted Sheffield. "First the organ, and every one rising. Then the vice-chancellor in red, and his bow to the preacher, who turns to the pulpit. Then all the heads, in order. And lastly the proctors. Meanwhile, you see the head of the preacher slowly mounting up the steps. When he gets in, he shuts to the door, looks at the organ loft to catch the psalm, and the voices strike up." Sheffield laughed, and then said, "Well, I confess I agree with you in your instance. The preacher is, or is supposed to be, a person of talent. He is about to hold forth. The divines, the students of a great university, are all there to listen. The pageant does but fitly represent the great moral fact which is before us. I understand this I don't call this fudge. What I mean by fudge is outside without, inside. Now I must say, the sermon itself, and not the least of all the prayer before it, what do they call it? The bidding prayer," said Reading. "Well, both sermon and prayer are often arrant fudge. I don't often go to university sermons, but I have gone often enough not to go again, without compulsion. The last preacher I heard was from the country. Oh, it was wonderful. He began at the pitch of his voice. Ye shall pray. What stuff? Ye shall pray . Because old Latimer or Jewell said, yet shall pray. Therefore we must not say, let us pray. Presently he brought out, continued Sheffield, assuming a pompous and up and down tone, especially for that pure and apostolic branch of it, established . Here the man rose on his toes. Established in these dominions. Next came, for our sovereign Lady Victoria, Queen, defender of the faith, in all causes and over all persons, ecclesiastical as well as civil, within these her dominions. Supreme an awful pause, with an audible fall of the sermon case on the cushion, as though nature did not contain as if the human mind could not sustain a bigger thought. Then followed the pious and munificent founder, in the same twang, of All Saints and Leicester colleges. But his chef d'oeuvre was his emphatic recognition of all the doctors, both the proctors, as if the numerical antithesis had a graphic power, and threw those excellent personages into a charming tableau vivant. Charles was amused at all this, but he said in answer that he never heard a sermon, but it was his own fault if he did not gain good from it. And he quoted the words of his father, who, when he one day asked him if so and so had not preached a very good sermon, "My dear Charles," his father had said, "all sermons are good." The words, simple as they were, had retained a hold on his memory. Meanwhile, they had proceeded down the forbidden High Street, and were crossing the bridge, when, on the opposite side, they saw before them a tall, upright man, whom Sheffield had no difficulty in recognizing as a bachelor of Nuns' Hall, and a bore at least of the second magnitude. He was in cap and gown, but went on his way, as if intending, in that extraordinary guise, to take a country walk. He took the path which they were going themselves, and they tried to keep behind him, but they walked too briskly, and he too leisurely, to allow of that. It is very difficult duly to delineate a bore in a narrative, for the very reason that he is a bore. A tale must aim at condensation, but a bore acts in solution. It is only on the long run that he is ascertained. Then, indeed, he is felt. He is oppressive, like the sirocco, which the native detects at once, while a foreigner is often at fault. Tenet. Occidic. Did you hear him make but one speech? Perhaps you would say, he was a pleasant, well-informed man. But when he never comes to an end, or has one and the same prose every time you meet him, or keeps you standing till you are fit to sink, or holds you fast when you wish to keep an engagement, or hinders you listening to important conversation, then there is no mistake. The truth bursts on you. Apparent diri facies. You are in the clutches of a bore. You may yield, or you may flee. You cannot conquer. Hence it is clear that a bore cannot be represented in a story, or the story would be the bore as much as he, the reader, then must believe this upright Mr. Bateman to be what otherwise he might not discover, and thank us for our consideration in not proving as well as asserting it. Sheffield bowed to him courteously, and would have proceeded on his way. But Bateman, as became his nature, would not suffer it. He seized him. "Are you disposed," he said, "to look into the pretty chapel we are restoring on the common? It is quite a gem in the purest style of the 14th century. It was in a most filthy condition, a mere cowhouse. But we have made a subscription, and set it to rights. We are bound for Oxley." Sheffield answered, "You would be taking us out of our way." "Not a bit of it," said Bateman. "It's not a stone's throw from the road. You must not refuse me. I'm sure you'll like it." He proceeded to give the history of the chapel, all it had been, all it might have been, all it was not, all it was to be. It is to be a real specimen of a Catholic chapel. He said. We mean to make the attempt of getting the bishop to dedicate it to the royal martyr. Why should not we have our St. Charles as well as the Romanists? And it will be quite sweet to hear the vesper bell tolling over the sullen moor every evening, in all weathers, and amid all the changes and chances of this mortal life. Sheffield asked what congregation they expected to collect at that hour. That's a low view, answered Bateman. It does not signify at all. In real Catholic churches the number of the congregation is nothing to the purpose. Service is for those who come, not for those who stay away. Well, said Sheffield, I understand what that means when a Roman Catholic says it. For a priest is supposed to offer. Again, Catholic chapels often stand over the bodies of martyrs, or on some place of miracle, as a record. But our service is common prayer. And how can you have that without a congregation? Bateman replied that, even if members of the university did not drop in, which he expected, at least the bell would be a memento far and near. Ah, I see, retorted Sheffield. The use will be the reverse of what you said just now. It is not for those that come, but for those who stay away. The congregation is outside, not inside. It's an outside concern. I once saw a tall church tower, so it appeared from the road. But on the sides you saw it was but a thin wall, made to look like a tower, in order to give the church an imposing effect. Do run up such a bit of a wall, and put the bell in it. There's another reason, answered Bateman, for restoring the chapel, quite independent of the service. It has been a chapel from time immemorial, and was consecrated by our Catholic forefathers. Sheffield argued that this would be as good a reason for keeping up the Mass as for keeping up the chapel. We do keep up the Mass, said Bateman. We offer our Mass every Sunday, according to the rite of the English Cyprian, as honest Peter Halen calls him. What would you have more? Whether Sheffield understood this or no, at least it was beyond Charles. Was the common prayer the English Mass, or the communion service, or the litany, or the sermon, or any part of these? Or were Bateman's words really a confession that there were clergymen who actually said the Popish Mass once a week? Bateman's precise meaning, however, is lost to posterity, for they had by this time arrived at the door of the chapel. It had once been the chapel of an almshouse. A small farmhouse stood near, but for population, it was plain no church accommodation was wanted. Before entering, Charles hung back, and whispered to his friend that he did not know Bateman. An introduction, in consequence, took place. Reading of St. Saviour's Bateman of Nuns' Hall. After which ceremony, in place of holy water, they managed to enter the chapel in company. It was as pretty a building as Bateman had led them to expect, and very prettily done up. There was a stone altar in the best style, a credence table, a piscina, what looked like a tabernacle, and a couple of handsome brass candlesticks. Charles asked the use of the piscina. He did not know its name, and was told that there was always a piscina in the old churches in England, and that there could be no proper restoration without it. Next he asked the meaning of the beautifully wrought closet or recess above the altar. and received for answer, that our sister churches of the Roman obedience always had a tabernacle for reserving the consecrated bread. Here Charles was brought to a stand, on which Sheffield asked the use of the niches, and was told by Bateman that images of saints were forbidden by the canon, but that his friends, in all these matters, did what they could. Lastly, he asked the meaning of the candlesticks, and was told that, Catholically minded as their bishop was, they had some fear lest he would object to altar lights in service, at least at first. But it was plain that the use of the candlesticks was to hold candles. Having had their fill of gazing and admiring, they turned to proceed on their walk, but could not get off an invitation to breakfast in a few days at Bateman's lodgings in the Turl. Chapter 3. Neither of the friends had what are called views in religion, by which expression we do not here signify that neither had taken up a certain line of opinion, though this was the case also, but that neither of them, how could they at their age, had placed his religion on an intellectual basis. It may be as well to state more distinctly what a view is, what it is to be viewing, and what is the state of those who have no views. When, then, men for the first time look upon the world of politics or religion, all that they find there meets their mind's eye, as a landscape addresses itself for the first time to a person who has just gained his bodily sight. One thing is as far off as another. There is no perspective, the connection of fact with fact, truth with truth, the bearing of fact upon truth, and truth upon fact. What leads to what? What are points primary and what secondary? All this they have yet to learn. It is all a new science to them, and they do not even know their ignorance of it. Moreover, the world of today has no connection in their minds with the world of yesterday. Time is not a stream, but stands before them round and full, like the moon. They do not know what happened 10 years ago, much less the annals of a century. The past does not live to them in the present. They do not understand the worth of contested points. Names have no associations for them, and persons kindle no recollections. They hear of men, and things, and projects, and struggles, and principles. But everything comes and goes like the wind. Nothing makes an impression. Nothing penetrates. Nothing has its place. In their minds, they locate nothing. They have no system. They hear and they forget. Or they just recollect what they have once heard. They can't tell where. Thus they have no consistency in their arguments. That is, they argue one way today, and not exactly the other way tomorrow, but indirectly the other way. At random, their lines of argument diverge. Nothing comes to a point. There is no one center in which their mind sits, on which their judgment of men and things proceeds. This is the state of many men all through life, and miserable politicians or churchmen they make, unless by good luck they are in safe hands, and ruled by others, or are pledged to a course, else they are at the mercy of the winds and waves, and, without being radical, Whig, Tory, or Conservative, High Church or Low Church, they do Whig acts, Tory acts, Catholic acts, and heretical acts, as the fit takes them, or as events, or parties drive them, and sometimes, when their self-importance is hurt, they take refuge in the idea that all this is a proof that they are unfettered, moderate, dispassionate, that they observe the mean, that they are no party men, when they are, in fact, the most helpless of slaves. For our strength in this world is to be the subjects of the reason, and our liberty to be captives of the truth. Now Charles Reading, a youth of 20, could not be supposed to have much of a view in religion or politics. But no clever man allows himself to judge of things simply at haphazard. He is obliged, from a sort of self-respect, to have some rule or other, true or false. And Charles was very fond of the maxim, which he has already enunciated, that we must measure people by what they are, and not by what they are not. He had a great notion of loving every one, of looking kindly on every one. He was pierced with the sentiment which he had seen in a popular volume of poetry, that Christian souls, though worn and soiled with sinful clay, are yet, to eyes that see them true, all glistening with baptismal dew. He liked, as he walked along the road, and met laborer or horseman, gentleman or beggar, to say to himself, he is a Christian. And when he came to Oxford, he came there with an enthusiasm so simple and warm as to be almost childish. He reverenced even the velvet of the nay, the cocked hat which preceded the preacher had its claim on his deferential regard. Without being himself a poet, he was in the season of poetry, in the sweet springtime, when the year is most beautiful, because it is new. Novelty was beauty to a heart so open and cheerful as his, not only because it was novelty, and had its proper charm as such, but because when we first see things, we see them in a gay confusion, which is a principal element of the poetical. As time goes on, and we number and sort and measure things as we gain views, we advance towards philosophy and truth. But we recede from poetry. When we ourselves were young, we once on a time walked on a hot summer day from Oxford to Newington, a dull road, as anyone who has gone it knows. Yet it was new to us, and we protest to you, reader, believe it or not, laugh or not, as you will, to us it seemed on that occasion quite touchingly beautiful, and a soft melancholy came over us, of which the shadows fall even now, when we look back on that dusty, weary journey. And why? Because every object which met us was unknown, and full of mystery. A tree or two in the distance seemed the beginning of a great wood, or park, stretching endlessly. A hill implied a vale beyond, with that vale's history. The by-lanes, with their green hedges, wound and vanished, yet were not lost to the imagination. Such was our first journey. But when we had gone it several times, the mind refused to act. The scene ceased to enchant. Stern reality alone remained, and we thought it one of the most tiresome, odious roads we ever had occasion to traverse. But to return to our story, such was Reading. But Sheffield, on the other hand, without possessing any real view of things more than Charles, was, at this time, fonder of hunting for views, and more in danger of taking up false ones. That is, he was viewing, in a bad sense of the word. He was not satisfied intellectually with things as they are. He was critical, impatient to reduce things to system, pushed principles too far, was fond of argument, partly from pleasure in the exercise, partly because he was perplexed, though he did not lay anything very much to heart. They neither of them felt any special interest in the controversy going on in the university and country about high and low church. Sheffield had a sort of contempt for it, and Reading felt it to be bad taste to be unusual or prominent in anything. An Eton acquaintance had asked him to go and hear one of the principal preachers of the Catholic party, and offered to introduce him. But he had declined it. He did not like, he said, mixing himself up with party. He had come to Oxford to get his degree, and not to take up opinions. He thought his father would not relish it, and, moreover, he felt some little repugnance to such opinions and such people, under the notion that the authorities of the university were opposed to the whole movement. He could not help looking at its leaders as demagogues, and towards demagogues he felt an unmeasured aversion and contempt. He did not see why clergymen, however respectable, should be collecting undergraduates about them, and he heard stories of their way of going on which did not please him. Moreover, he did not like the specimens of their followers whom he fell in with. They were forward, or they talked strong, as it was called, did ridiculous, extravagant acts, and sometimes neglected their college duties for things which did not concern them. He was unfortunate, certainly, for this is a very unfair account of the most exemplary men of that day, who doubtless are still, as clergymen or laymen, the strength of the Anglican Church, but in all collections of men, the straw and rubbish, as Lord Bacon says, float on the top, while gold and jewels sink and are hidden. Or, what is more apposite still, many men, or most men, are a compound of precious and worthless together, and their worthless swims, and their precious lies at the bottom. Chapter 4. Bateman was one of these composite characters. He had much good and much cleverness in him, but he was absurd, and he afforded a subject of conversation to the two friends as they proceeded on their walk. "I wish there was less of fudge and humbug everywhere," said Sheffield. "One might shovel off cart loads from this place, and not miss it, if you had your way," answered Charles. "You would scrape off the roads, till there was nothing to walk on. We are forced to walk on what you call humbug. We put it under our feet, but we use it. I cannot think that. It's like doing evil that good may come. I see shams everywhere. I go into St. Mary's, and I hear men spouting out commonplaces in a deep or a shrill voice, or with slow, clear, quiet emphasis and significant eyes, as that Bampton preacher not long ago, who assured us, apropos of the resurrection of the body, that all attempts to resuscitate the inanimate corpse by natural methods had hitherto been experimentally abortive. I go into the place where degrees are given the convocation, I think, and there one hears a deal of unmeaning Latin for hours, graces, dispensations, and proctors, walking up and down for nothing. All in order to keep up a sort of ghost of things passed away for centuries, while the real work might be done in a quarter of an hour. I fall in with this Bateman, and he talks to me of rude lofts without roods, and piscini without water, and niches without images, and candlesticks without lights, and masses without popery, till I feel, with Shakespeare, that all the world's a stage. Well, I go to Shaw, Turner, and Brown, very different men, pupils of Drive, Gloucester, you know whom I mean, and they tell us that we ought to put up crucifixes by the wayside, in order to excite religious feeling. Well, I really think you are hard on all these people, said Charles. It is all very much like declamation. You would destroy externals of every kind. You are like the man in one of Miss Edgeworth's novels, who shut his ears to the music that he might laugh at the dancers. What is the music to which I close my ears? Asked Sheffield. To the meaning of those various acts, answered Charles. The pious feeling which accompanies the sight of the image is the music. To those who have the pious feeling. Certainly, said Sheffield. But to put up images in England in order to create the feeling is like dancing to create music. I think you are hard upon England, replied Charles. We are a religious people. Well, I will put it differently. Do you like music? You ought to know, said Charles, whom I have frightened so often with my fiddle. Do you like dancing? To tell the truth, said Charles, I don't. Nor do I, said Sheffield. It makes me laugh to think what I have done when a boy, to escape dancing. There is something so absurd in it. And one had to be civil and to duck to young girls who were either prim or pert. I have behaved quite rudely to them sometimes, and then have been annoyed at my ungentlemanlikeness, and not known how to get out of the scrape. Well, I didn't know we were so like each other in anything, said Charles. Oh, the misery I have endured in having to stand up to dance, and to walk about with a partner, everybody looking at me, and I so awkward. It has been a torture to me days before and after. They had by this time come up to the foot of the rough rising ground, which leads to the sort of tableland on the edge of which Oxley is placed. And they stood still a while to see some equestrians take the hurdles. They then mounted the hill, and looked back upon Oxford. Perhaps you call those beautiful spires and towers a sham, said Charles, because you see their tops and not their bottoms. Whereabouts were we in our argument? Said the other, reminded that they had been wandering from it for the last 10 minutes. Oh, I recollect. I know what I was at. I was saying that you liked music, but didn't like dancing. Music leads another person to dance, but not you. And dancing does not increase but diminishes the intensity of the pleasure you find in music. In like manner, it is a mere piece of pedantry to make a religious nation, like the English, more religious by placing images in the streets. This is not the English way, and only offends us. If it were our way, it would come naturally without anyone telling us. As music incites to dancing, so religion would lead to images. But as dancing does not improve music to those who do not like dancing, So ceremonies do not improve religion to those who do not like ceremonies. Then do you mean, said Charles, that the English Romanists are shams because they use crucifixes? Stop there, said Sheffield. Now you are getting upon a different subject. They believe that there is _virtue in images. That indeed is absurd in them. But it makes them quite consistent in honoring them. They do not put up images as outward shows, merely to create feelings in the minds of beholders, as Gloucester would do. But they in good, downright earnest worship images, as being more than they seem, as being not a mere outside show. They pay them a religious worship, as having been handled by great saints years ago, as having been used in pestilences, as having wrought miracles, as having moved their eyes or bowed their heads, or, at least, as having been blessed by the priest, and been brought into connection with invisible grace. This is superstitious, but it is real. Charles was not satisfied. An image is a mode of teaching, he said. Do you mean to say that a person is a sham merely because he mistakes the particular mode of teaching best suited to his own country? I did not say that drive Gloucester was a sham, answered Sheffield. But that mode of teaching of his was among Protestants a sham and a humbug. But this principle will carry you too far, and destroy itself, said Charles. Don't you recollect what Thompson quoted the other day out of Aristotle, which he had lately begun in lecture with Vincent, and which we thought so acute that habits are created by those very acts in which they manifest themselves when created? We learn to swim well by trying to swim. Now Bateman, doubtless, wishes to introduce Pacini and tabernacles, and to wait before beginning till they are received, is like not going into the water till you can swim. Well, but what is Bateman the better when his Pacini are universal? Asked Sheffield. What does it mean ? In the Romish Church it has a use. I don't know what, but it comes into the Mass. But if Bateman makes Pacini universal among us, what has he achieved but the reign of a universal humbug? But, my dear Sheffield, answered Reading, consider how many things there are which, in the course of time, have altered their original meaning, and yet have a meaning, though a changed one. Still, the Judge's wig is no sham, yet it has a history. The Queen, at her coronation, is said to wear a Roman Catholic vestment. Is that a sham? Does it not still typify and impress upon us the divinity that doth hedge a king, though it has lost the very meaning which the Church of Rome gave it? Or are you of the number of those who, according to the witticism, think majesty, when deprived of its externals, a jest? Then you defend the introduction of unmeaning Pacini and candlesticks. I think, answered Charles, that there's a great difference between reviving and retaining. It may be natural to retain, even while the use fails; unnatural to revive when it has failed. But this is a question of discretion and judgment. Then you give it against Bateman? Said Sheffield. A slight pause ensued. Then Charles added, but perhaps these men actually do wish to introduce the realities as well as the externals. Perhaps they wish to use the piscina as well as to have it. Sheffield. He continued abruptly. Why are not canonicals a sham? If Pacini are shams. Canonicals, said Sheffield, as if thinking about them. No. Canonicals are no sham. For preaching, I suppose, is the highest ordinance in our church, and has the richest dress. The robes of a great preacher cost, I know, many pounds. For there was one near us who, on leaving, had a present from the ladies of an entire set, and a dozen pair of worked slippers into the bargain. But it's all fitting, if preaching is the great office of the clergy. Next comes the sacrament, and has the surplice and hood. And hood, he repeated, musing. What's that for? No. It's the scarf. The hood is worn in the university pulpit. What is the scarf? It belongs to chaplains, I believe. That is, to underscore persons underscore. I can't make a view out of it. My dear Sheffield, said Charles, you have cut your own throat. Here, you have been trying to give a sense to the clerical dress, and cannot. Are you then prepared to call it a sham? Answer me the single question: why does a clergyman wear a surplice when he reads prayers? Nay, I will put it more simply: why can only a clergyman read prayers in church? Why cannot I? Sheffield hesitated, and looked serious. Do you know, he said, you have just pitched on Jeremy Bentham's objection. In his Church of Englandism he proposes, if I recollect rightly, that a parish boy should be taught to read the liturgy. And he asks, why send a person to the university for 3 or 4 years at an enormous expense? Why teach him Latin and Greek, on purpose to read what any boy could be taught to read at a dame's school? What is the underscore virtue underscore of a clergyman's reading? Something of this kind, Bentham says. And, he added, slowly, to tell the truth, underscore I underscore don't know how to answer him. Reading was surprised, and shocked, and puzzled too. He did not know what to say, when the conversation was, perhaps fortunately, interrupted. Chapter V. Every year brings changes and reforms. We do not know what is the state of Oxley Church now. It may have rude loft, piscina, sedilia, all new, or it may be reformed backwards, the seats on principle turning from the communion table, and the pulpit planted in the middle of the aisle. But, at the time when these two young men walked through the churchyard, there was nothing very good or very bad to attract them within the building, and they were passing on, when they observed, coming out of the church, what Sheffield called an elderly don, a fellow of a college, whom Charles knew. He was a man of family, and had some little property of his own, had been a contemporary of his father's at the university, and had from time to time been a guest at the parsonage. Charles had, in consequence, known him from a boy, and now, since he came into residence, he had, as was natural, received many small attentions from him. Once, when he was late for his own hall, he had given him his dinner in his rooms. He had taken him out on a fishing expedition towards Farringdon, and had promised him tickets for some ladies, lionesses of his, who were coming up to the commemoration. He was a shrewd, easy-tempered, free-spoken man, of small desires and no ambition, of no very keen sensibilities or romantic delicacies, and very little religious pretension. That is, though unexceptionable in his deportment, he hated the show of religion, and was impatient at those who affected it. He had known the university for 30 years, and formed a right estimate of most things in it. He had come out to Oxley to take a funeral for a friend, and was now returning home. He hallooed to Charles, who, though feeling at first awkward on finding himself with two such different friends and in two such different relations, was, after a time, partially restored to himself by the unconcern of Mr. Malcolm, and the three walked home together. Yet, even to the last, he did not quite know how and where to walk, and how to carry himself, particularly when they got near Oxford, and he fell in with various parties who greeted him in passing. Charles, by way of remark, said they had been looking in at a pretty